All right. And Rob, we start with the third step prayer.
We certainly do. And it's on page 63 of your big book. God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always.
All right.
Just for today. Thanks, guys.
Yep. Thank you, Rob. Okay, so what is kind of special about today is that we're going to start at the beginning of the book again, and hopefully we'll be able to add a few things that we haven't had before. So the focus of this is going to be on the program of recovery. We are covering the first portion of the big book, which we'll talk about what that includes as we get through it. And we hear from Rob, and we're also going to hear from Bill towards the end of the meeting, and that certainly will get us started. So I'm going to start at the very beginning here. We're going to start at the title page, Alcoholics Anonymous. And one of the things I wanted to talk about as far as the name of the book and the program, Alcoholics Anonymous, a couple of gentlemen by the name of Hank Parkhurst and Joe Warden were the ones that actually were the authors of the name AA. Some of the other names of the book and the program was considered. It included 100 Men, The Way Out, and the Bill W. movement. All of those had been considered in the beginning, but they did finally settle on Alcoholics Anonymous. So, Rob, if we would read that first page.
You got it. So it's a title, what I consider the title page. Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism.
Okay. And Rob, what's the most important part of what that you just read?
The story.
And why is that?
It's because it's how they did it. They're going to tell us exactly how they recovered from alcoholism.
Yeah, okay. So there's two words there that I think that we'll highlight, and that is first of all, exactly how they did it. And that's going to be something that we specifically want to make sure that we emphasize as we go through this, is that it is exactly how they recovered and how we can apply this same program to our own recovery and how we can take it and carry it forward. And then the next word is recovered. I think it's important that we acknowledge that this group, the Keystone Group, myself included, do believe that you actually recover from alcoholism. And what do I mean by that? I mean by that is that we are able to overcome this seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. We'll talk in a little bit more detail of that later as well, but we actually recover from this seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And when you get the flu, you recover from the flu, but you're still going to be susceptible to the flu even after you've recovered from it. Like you break an arm, you recover from breaking a bone in your body, and at the same time you're susceptible to breaking either that same bone or another bone in your body. Hopefully not, but in any case, you recover from those ailments. And this disease that we have, we can actually recover from it. So recovered is used 17 times in this book, and we'll highlight them as we go along. But I do want to make sure that we put this to bed now, and that is that we believe that you do in fact recover from alcoholism, even though in the end you're always going to be an alcoholic. All right, and this is also the first promise of hope, is how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. All right. And it is a collective understanding of how that is. And it is their program. And this is another thing we'll define later. It's their program, not our program or my program. This is their program that we're working from. All right, Rob?
Yeah, Leo, I just want to read. I got this meme that got circulated. And it talks about recovered. We're not cured of alcoholism, recovered, but not cured. That presents a conflict to some alcoholics. If we were cured, we'd be able to drink responsibly. No, we are not cured. The allergic reaction to alcohol will remain with us for our lifetime, but we have been restored to sanity. That was the problem. The main problem in the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than his body, page 23. We are now sane where alcohol is concerned. Consequently, we have recovered. And the dictionary, recovered is past tense. We have regained possession of something that was lost. So I just wanted to throw that in because, as you said, a lot of people, I'm in recovery. Well, this book tells us that we have recovered. 17 times it tells us that. So.
Excellent, Rob. Excellent. All right, so a couple of other notes I want to make off of the title page. We are working from the 4th edition. So if you are working from another edition, by and large, the first portion of the book is left completely unchanged. So the only difference is you might not have forward to the 4th edition in there if you're working from a 3rd edition, for example. But I did want to make sure it's clear to us that we are in fact working from the 4th edition of the book. And I also wanted to kind of highlight that this book, the whole book, is really a reflection of step 2. So we'll get into that in more detail as well. And last but not least, on the title page that I want to go over and cover is that AA is not a treatment for alcoholism. AA has a solution for alcoholism, and there's a big difference there. All right. Okay, so we'll turn the page and we'll go to the table of contents. And I will also kind of introduce the idea that this book is a basic text, and we'll cover that again in more detail, but it is a book that is an instruction manual. It's not fiction or nonfiction. It's just service to others is the instruction of this book. So this is an instructional manual. All right. The contents, and this is how I kind of define what is the first portion of the book, and this is what we're going to cover, and that is including the title page. It includes the preface, the 4 forewords, and the 11 chapters thereafter, and the appendices, and more specifically, the second appendix on page 567, which is the spiritual experience. So, aside from that, I've defined, and I put this out to the right in the margin here, the preface all the way through the foreword to the 4th edition is the general information and history of the book. The doctor's opinion, Bill's story, there is a solution, and more about alcoholism focuses on step 1. We agnostics is step 2. How it works is steps 3 and 4. Into action is steps 5 to 11. Working with others is step 12. And the last 4 chapters, to wives, the family afterward, to employers, a vision for you, is steps 8 through 12. And I also put out there that this is very good instruction for sponsoring others. Those 4 chapters are excellent guides for sponsoring other alcoholics. And essentially this, I also put for the last 4 chapters, is practicing the principles through all our affairs. So this is really kind of the icing on the cake after you've been through the first 7 chapters, the preface, the forewords to the 4 editions, etc. Rob?
Hey, you covered it perfectly, Leo.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and define a couple of things here with regard to the rest of the book, although we don't really cover the rest of the book. But I will say that the part one that you see, Pioneers of AA, are what we have referred to as low bottom drunks. Now, throughout the book, in the first portion, there are a couple of folks that we will refer to that have their stories in this part one. Part two, which is the next group, they stopped in time, are largely considered the high bottom drunks. And then part three, which is they not lost nearly all. Again, we go back to low bottom drunks. And for those three parts, Rob, do you have anything to add?
No, the only thing I will add is that we do go through Dr. Bob's nightmare because he's a co-founder of this. So we do go through his story because it has a lot of great information in it that we can use. Yeah,
the two stories that we really cover is Bill W. and that's a good point, Rob, and Dr. Bob. And we'll see in Bill W.'s story, and again, this is just a little bit of a precursor, is that his story kind of goes through the full 12 steps as it applies to a person. And it's very good for that. Dr. Bob's nightmare, which is the story that we go through with Dr. Bob, is really a very good focus on how a person becomes alcoholic and the consequences that they suffer throughout being an alcoholic. And it does finish with finding Bill W. and going through the recovery, but that is a very small portion of it. His is a largely good study on somebody that how they became alcoholic and the consequences that come with it. All right, so we are at the preface at this point, and what I will do is say this is that this is more than a book. It's designed to transfer information. That's what we're about to do. And we are on page XI, and it's designed to enable you to have a spiritual experience large enough to affect a change for recovery. And it's a transfer of knowledge to get sober. All right, Rob,
we're ready to go.
We're ready.
So the preface or the preface, whatever you want to call it, we're easy here. This is the 4th edition of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. The first edition appeared in April 1939, and in the following 16 years, more than 300,000 copies went into circulation. The second edition, published in 1955, reached a total of more than 1,150,500 copies. The third edition, which came off press in 1976, achieved a circulation of approximately 19,550,000 in all formats.
Yeah, so really what we're basically saying here is that there was it was a moderate growth in the beginning. 300,000 copies was amazing over that 16 years. But then boom, once we got to the second and third and fourth editions, we quickly blossomed from 300,000 all the way up to 19,550,000 in all formats. And at this point in time, if there was an update, there's even more. So just an amazing amount of growth that came with Alcoholics Anonymous. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the factors that came into being with regard to that as we go along. Rob?
Okay. Because this book has become the basic text for our society and has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery, there exists strong sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. Therefore, the first portion of this volume describing the AA recovery program has been left largely untouched in the course of revisions made for the second, third, and fourth editions. The section called The Doctor's Opinion has been kept intact, just as it was originally written in 1939 by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, our society's great medical benefactor.
Yeah, so there's a lot to kind of peel back here in this particular paragraph in this book, that this becomes as a basic text. And I think we want to reinforce the fact that the basic text is the first portion of this book, and we talk about that, and we have already talked about it. Again, that includes the title page, the preface, and the four forewords, and then chapters 1 through 11, and then the appendices of spiritual experience in the back. So a lot of times you'll hear people talk about, well, it's the first 164 pages. Well, that's not completely true. In fact, that's inaccurate to that extent. And so it is including the first 164 pages, but it's so much more than that. And they basically say again, and we've talked about this, is that men and women have recovered, and there exists strong sentiments against any radical changes being made in it. And the reason there's a strong sentiment against any radical changes is simply because it works. And if it works, there's no reason to change it. And so what that speaks to me, is the power and the strength of this program, if followed specifically and exactly as it's prescribed. There is a strong result in that the people that do that recover, and they stay recovered. If you were to embrace this program exactly as it's outlined here and stick with it, you are largely going to be completely recovered for the rest of your life. We'll talk a little bit more about the doctor's opinion. It does kind of introduce that. Dr. William D. Silkworth is going to be you will come to know him as one of the strongest members of the beginning of AA. And when I say member, contributor, I think is really a better word for it. But I will tell you that without Dr. Silkworth, AA might not have happened. So he is one of those strong beginning contributors that really helped AA come to be, and his support of AA, and we'll talk more about that, was nothing less than just absolutely incredible. And we'll cover that as we go along.
Yeah, Leo, the only thing I'll throw in there is that Dr. Silkworth was not an alcoholic, but he did work in the treatment center.
Right.
So I just want to throw that in.
Yep.
The second printing of the first edition added the appendix, Spiritual Experience. In the second edition, the appendices on AA tradition, the medical view and religious view of AA, the Lasker Award, and information on how to contact AA were added, and the appendix on the Alcoholic Foundation was discontinued. But the chief change was in the section of personal stories, which was expanded to reflect the fellowship's growth. Bill's story, Dr. Bob's nightmare, and one other personal history from the first edition were retained intact. 3 were edited, and one of these was retitled. New versions of two stories were written with new titles. 30 completely new stories were added, and the story section was divided into 3 parts under the same headings that are used now.
Yeah. So there's a lot of change there from the first to the second edition, and largely from each edition thereafter. It was really the stories in the back were either changed, edited, discontinued, added, etc. One of the things I think that's important here is that we have the spiritual experience in the back, and it's not time for us to cover that, but we'll cover that later. The spiritual experience was described in the first portion of the book, but it wasn't really defined. And there were a lot of people asking the questions, well, what is this spiritual experience? And so that's why the spiritual experience, and why it's highlighted here, in that it was added after the second printing of the first edition, to make sure that there was a definition in there so that people understood what we were talking about when we talked about the program's spiritual experience. Some of these other appendices are also added. It's not something that we cover in detail, But those extra appendices were also added. And it's interesting too, is that how to contact AA has largely remained the exact same way as it did all the way from back then. So quite a incredible staying power of having this the same ability to contact AA as a whole. Rob?
In the third edition, Part 1, Pioneers of AA, was left unchanged. 9 of the stories in Part 2, They Stopped in Time, were carried over from the second edition. 8 new stories were added. In Part 3, They Lost Nearly All. 8 stories were retained. 5 new ones were added.
So we're basically just talking about the subtle changes and some of the bigger changes that went into each of these editions and in the history of this book. So just not much more to add to this other than the fact that we're outlining what some of the changes are. Rob?
This fourth edition includes the 12 concepts for world service and revises the 3 sections of personal stories as follows. 1 new story has been added to Part 1, and 2 that originally appeared in Part 3 have been repositioned there. 6 stories have been deleted. 6 of the stories in Part 2 have been carried over. 11 new ones have been added and 11 taken out. Part 3 now includes 12 new stories. 8 were removed in addition to the 2 that were transferred to Part 1. Will there be a test on what was taken in and out later on?
No, that's it's interesting highlights as far as that goes, but it just goes to show you that they want to try and keep up with the more current members of AA and their stories. I will say that there is a 5th edition that's being written, as we understand it. It's going to be a different kind of edition in that they're going to try and bring the language up to current definitions and wording and genericize it a little bit more so than what they did from back in 1939 and later years. So that's coming up. It'll be interesting to see what stories that are either retained or added as they go along.
Yeah, I just wonder, will they have any, because we have Zoom babies now that people have gotten sober through Zoom. I would be interested in their stories and, how they've encountered it.
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh, well. All changes made over the years in the Big Book, AA members' fond nickname for this volume, have had the same purpose: to represent the current membership of Alcoholics Anonymous more accurately, and thereby to reach more alcoholics. If you have a drinking problem, we hope that you may pause in reading one of the 42 personal stories and think, yes, that happened to me. Or more important, yes, I felt like that. Or most important, yes, I believe this program can work for me too.
Yeah. And this is one of the areas where we can change some of the wording here to questions instead of statements. And in fact, what you might say here is did that happen to me? And that's you could turn it around. Or have I felt like that? And do I believe this program can work for me? So those are things that you should be thinking in terms of, in generality, when you're going through this book, to kind of that being in a sense of related to what is being written and stated here. All right, we're going to look at forward to the first edition now, and one of the things that comes out of this that we want to look at is that we're looking at the problem, the solution, and the course of action. And what do I mean by that? The problem is the admission that you have a problem and the identification of a problem. The solution is provided or prescribed in this book, and the course of action is the application of this program to where you are. So we'll go ahead and just start with that. Rob?
Yep, we're on page XIII, everybody. Forward to the first edition. This is the forward as it appeared in the first printing of the first edition in 1939. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. We think this account of our experiences will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person. And besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all.
Okay, so really, there's a lot to talk about here in this first paragraph. First of all, it is more than 100 men and women. So at the time, relatively small group of folks, although for them, they felt like this was a large group. It was somewhere in the number of approximately 100. And so that's important to note. They do talk about recovered twice in this paragraph. So have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. So two things here. One is that they again talk about recovered as opposed to recovering. So that's important to note. The second one is this hopeless state of mind and body, which are in fact, and this is another distinction that we make at the Keystone Group, as it is made clearly in the book, and that is that there are two symptoms to alcoholism, and they are the mind and body. In other words, we will define this later, the malady and the allergy, and that's something that's important here, that we have made a distinction. A lot of folks out there will talk about a third symptom, which is the spiritual malady. And we do not subscribe to that, in part because the spiritual malady is something that everyone suffers from, whether you are alcoholic or not. So the main purpose of this book is to show other alcoholics precisely, exactly how we have recovered. And we're talking about how they have recovered, and it's their understanding, not ours. This is their program, not ours, and not my program. And I've underlined this, so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. There is nothing that we apologize for or make excuses for. This is a very good program. It works if you subscribe to it completely. And everyone can recover from alcoholism if they follow this exactly as it's prescribed. And we also will talk about this a little bit. A lot of people don't comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person. They feel like that this is just a lack, this is laziness and a lack of self-will, that they could just stop if they really wanted to. And we will talk in detail about how that is not true. And the way of living has advantages for all. And now we're talking not only for just the alcoholic, but this way of life, this spiritual way of life, is something that everyone can benefit from, regardless if they are alcoholic or not. Rob? You're on mute.
Sorry, I just said the most brilliant thing in the world and you missed it. I apologize for that. My dog I got two dogs, they start barking, so I have to mute myself every once in a while. Anyway, what I was saying is, in this one paragraph, there is a lot of really, really important information. It talks about the two symptoms. It talks about how hopeless. Why were they hopeless? Because they saw no solution. So if they're going to go through the book and give us a solution, they talk about the problem, the solution, and the course of action. No authentication is needed. All you need to do is go to this book. It's going to give you all the information you need. Why? Because it works. And it's worked for hundreds, thousands, probably millions, but I don't know the correct numbers, so I won't go. But if we only took the old adage of the first 164 pages, we would miss this. We wouldn't know about this. And this is why, Leo takes the time to start right from the beginning, and goes through these things, because these are gems that we're mining, and, it's going to help us. because we're going to understand the book a little bit better. So thank you, Leo. It is important that we remain anonymous because we are too few at present to handle the overwhelming number of personal appeals which may result from this publication. Being mostly business or professional folk, we could not well carry on our occupations in such an event. We would like it understood that our alcoholic work is an avocation.
So a couple of things. One, we talk about being anonymous. That's going to be something that we talk about here. It's why we kind of just use first names and not full names. We also do this for a number of reasons. We stay anonymous so that we're not self-aggrandizing and using AA to our benefit, either financially or politically. We stay anonymous so that it protects each individual, especially when it comes to the other things like your job that you need to protect. A recovered alcoholic that's going through the program and is usually one of the better performing employees, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But there's a couple of things there that are important. And this is an avocation, you know, it's a big part of our lives as our family, our spiritual life, our professional life, etc. Alcoholic or AA is that work, and it's important. Rob?
Yeah, I just want to throw in from the Big Book dictionary that I have. Avocation, an activity taken up in addition to one's regular work or profession. And as I said, that is from the Big Book dictionary. And if anybody wants a copy of that Big Book dictionary, all they have to do, I will put my email up in the chat later on, and I will email it to you. So when writing or speaking publicly about alcoholism, we urge each of the fellowship to omit his personal name, designating himself instead as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Very earnestly, we ask the press also to observe this request, for otherwise we shall be greatly handicapped. We are not an organization in the conventional sense of the word. There are no fees or dues whatsoever. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. We are not allied with any particular faith, sect, or denomination, nor do we wish to oppose anyone. We simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted. We shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book, particularly from those who have commenced work with other alcoholics. We should like to be helpful to such cases. Inquiry by scientific, medical, and religious societies will be welcome. Alcoholics Anonymous.
Perfect. So a couple of things here. We are an organization, not an organization in the conventional sense of the word. And this is also important. There are no fees or dues whatsoever, although we do have the seventh tradition that is purely voluntary, and it just covers the expenses that might be incurred in order for us to, in fact, run our program. And so there is no profit whatsoever. The only requirement for membership, which is another important part here, is the honest, and that's the important thing here, is the honest desire to stop drinking. All right. That word honest, honesty, truthfulness, there's a lot of that is attached to that, and we'll cover that. But if you honestly desire to stop drinking, then you are a member, or will be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. At one point in time, there were a lot of rules and qualifiers, and it got out of hand, and they finally were able, during a lot of discussion, to get that list down to just one thing: an honest desire to stop drinking. They are not allied to any particular faith, sect, or denomination. So that's an important part of here. We're not talking about the form of spirituality that is the religious form in either Catholic, Jewish, Baptist, Hindu. It doesn't. None of those are what we're talking about. We're talking about a spiritual experience, and we'll define that more as we go along. But we are not affiliated with any sect or denomination or faith. That's also important. And I think that that's one of the things that as a sponsor, you want to make clear to a newcomer that's just getting started. Working with other alcoholics. This is probably the first time you're going to hear it, but you'll hear it many, many more times, that work with others, work with other alcoholics. Our step 12 is vital to staying recovered as an alcoholic. All right. The last thing I'll put in here is that this is a we program, not a me program. And the word we is used, I think, 18 times in the book. So we refer to that as a we program. So I want to make that distinction here. It's not a me program, but a we program. Rob?
Excellent. Thank you very much, Leo. A couple of points I want to bring up. Anonymity. Anonymity is great and everything, but if you go into the hospital and, there was one of the buddies that I knew from one of the fellowship meetings that I would go to. His name was Rocker John. How many Johns are there in the fellowship? There's tons of them. So he was known as Rocker John. Well, when I went to the hospital and I go to the nurse to say, I'm looking for Rocker John, I don't know who I'm talking about. So anonymity is great and all. And then Bill from New Jersey had a great one. He said, I'm here to see Gary with the big ears. Gary with the big ears. So anonymity is great, but you know what? If somebody ends up in the hospital and we don't know what their last name is, it's hard to go visit them. So, so please keep that in mind. I know that with, everybody's on Facebook, or a lot of people are on Facebook, and then anonymity isn't what it once was. Some people complain about Zoom meetings and the fact that, well, I can see your face. I can see Pinto Pete's face. So where's his anonymity? You know what? But in the fellowship, I would see his face anyways. So take that as, a grain of salt. The other thing I want to bring up is that the 12 traditions. Okay. Tradition number 3, the only requirement for a membership is a desire to stop drinking. Okay. And in the book here, it's got the only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. In 1958, they took it out. So I just want to throw that in. A little bit of history. And as Leo said, we is used 18 times just in this little section, and it's a we program. We want to be a part of it at the end of it. So on to the second edition, Leo.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
XV.
Forward to the second edition. Figures given in this forward describe the fellowship as it was in 1955. Since the original foreword to this book was written in 1939, a wholesale miracle has taken place. Our earliest printing voiced the hope that every alcoholic who journeys will find the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at its destination. Already continues the early text. 2s and 3s and 5s of us have sprung up in other communities.
So real quick, one of the things that we're talking about here is that I want to make a highlight of, and it's the 2s and 3s and 5s. It doesn't take but 2 people to have a meeting and to create that fellowship and to actually go through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. In fact, you can go through it on your own by yourself, but at this point in time, we have found that having somebody walk you through together is as important, if not more important, to the success of the program. But 2s and 3s and 5s, basically what's happening is that as people are getting the book, as they're learning about the program, they're starting to have these meetings to go through this, and they're seeing the success of recovery through doing that. Rob?
Yep. Okay. 60 years have elapsed between our first printing of this book and the presentation in 1955 of our second edition. In that brief space, Alcoholics Anonymous has mushroomed into nearly 6,000 groups whose membership is far above 150,000 recovered alcoholics. Groups are to be found in each of the United States and all of the provinces of Canada. AA is flourishing communities in the British Isles, the Scandinavian countries, South Africa, South America, Mexico, Alaska, Australia, and Hawaii. All told, promising beginnings have been made in some 50 foreign countries and U.S. possessions. Some are just now taking shape in Asia. Many of our friends encourage us by saying that this is but a beginning. only the augury of a much larger future ahead.
Yep. And so we're just basically talking about the expansion of Alcoholics Anonymous and the explosive growth that they're actually seeing from their very small beginnings of just 100 men and women. Just to make sure that there's an important point here. And Rob actually emphasized it as he was reading it, and that is far above 150,000 recovered alcoholics. Again, we're using that word recovered. Rob?
Yeah, I'll type in what augury is, but I'll say it right now. An augury is something that indicates future happenings. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Sure.
And also, I just want to mention, I'm in Toronto, large city. I'm in the burbs, of course. And there is a meeting every night of the week, if not 2 or 3, in a vicinity that's close enough to me that I can get to it by driving or taking the bus, or, even the church I used to go to as a child has an AA meeting. So, if you're living in a large city, they're all around, and they can all be found if you go to aa.org and check your community. So there's no reason why we can't get to a meeting. Or now Zoom is blossoming up, and there's meetings 24/7. The Keystone Group, which we're a small group, originally started out of Vancouver, and we have 16 Zoom meetings a week. 16. All big book based. So whatever you're looking for, whether you're looking for speaker meetings, you can find those on Zoom, or you can get out into your community and, carry this message. And that's what we stress so much about. It's this message. And I know we'll get into, I'm going to veer off just a little bit for a second, Leo, and I apologize for that.
No, don't apologize. That's good.
Going to meetings is fellowship. It's where we go to meet the newcomer. The program is in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the only place you're going to find it. And so I know that when I first came into the fellowship, they said, "Welcome to the program." Well, that's a misnomer, because that is not the program. The program is found in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Here is where we have the 12 steps. It's a basic text which we learned about that somebody should take you through. When we went to, school, we were given a textbook. We had a teacher take us through it. Similar to what we're doing here. I don't know how they did it, Leo, in 1939 by somebody in some small rural town, sent away for the book, had to read it, try to understand it. I'm sorry. You know what? It could be that because people in 1939 read more than we do now, that maybe their understanding was better. I don't honestly know. But if somebody didn't take me through this over and over and over again, I don't know if I would have understood it.
Yep. It takes some time.
But I digress. Sometimes I go off on a tangent, and I apologize to everybody for it.
Yep.
Okay, we're at the bottom of XV. The spark that was to flare into the first AA group was struck in Akron, Ohio, in June 1935, during a talk between a New York stockbroker and an Akron physician. 6 months earlier, the broker had been relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual experience, following a meeting with an alcoholic friend who had been in contact with the Oxford groups of that day. He had also been greatly helped by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, a New York specialist in alcoholism, who is now accounted no less than a medical saint by AA members, and whose story of the early days of our society appears in the next pages. From this doctor, the broker had learned the grave nature of alcoholism. Though he could not accept all the tenets of the Archer groups, he was convinced of the need for moral inventory, confession of personality defects, restitution to those harmed, helpfulness to others, and the necessity of belief in and dependence upon God.
Yeah, so this is a really good paragraph. First and foremost, it does introduce Bill W. as the stockbroker, the New York stockbroker, and Dr. Bob, who was the Akron, Ohio physician. All right. And 6 months earlier, through some discussion with Ebby Thatcher, who we'll talk about in Bill's story, had been relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual experience. And following a meeting with an alcoholic friend, that is Ebby Thatcher, and the Oxford groups played an important role in the beginning of Alcoholics Anonymous, although it wasn't Alcoholics Anonymous at the time. In fact, they were known as the Alcoholic Squad. If you really want to know the very beginning, the Oxford group set aside meetings for these Alcoholic Squad members, even though in those days, people that were non-alcoholics were also attending the meetings. So it was not uncommon to have a meeting with 30 to 50 people, including non-alcoholics, including spouses. It was a very formalized event, but one that would soon help to help define some of the tenets that we still use today, but not all. And we peeled away from the Oxford group, and we'll talk more about that as well. The Oxford group themselves were more of a religious group. They tended to want very affluent members, those of the upper class. And as we all know, alcoholics come from all walks of life. And Bill W. was adamant in saying that it doesn't matter what your socioeconomic background is, you are welcome in AA no matter what, whether your race, your creed, your religion, your socioeconomic status doesn't matter. You are welcome as long as you had that honest desire to stop drinking. And that was going against what was happening within the Oxford group. So that is in fact why Bill moved away from the Oxford group and created Alcoholics Anonymous as its own standalone group. Rob?
Yeah, so though he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford group, he was convinced of the need for moral inventory, step 4, confessions of personality defects, step 5 to 7, restitution to those harmed, 8 and 9, helpfulness to others, which we're going to find out as we go through the book is so important. Helpfulness to others, and the necessity of belief in and dependence upon God, 2, 3, 10, and 11. So, and also this is the only page that mentions the Oxford group. So I thought that was interesting. Prior to his journey to Akron, the broker had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that only an alcoholic could help an alcoholic, but he had succeeded only in keeping sober himself. The broker had gone to Akron on a business venture which had collapsed, leaving him greatly in fear that he might start drinking again. He suddenly realized that in order to save himself, he must carry his message to another alcoholic. That alcoholic turned out to be the Akron physician.
Yeah, and we know again is that is Dr. Bob. It's a great story that that happens here with regard to Bill, and had gone in and a business transaction had gone sour, and there was a lot of litigation, lawsuits that that ensued. But in that low time, Bill was at a hotel, and he was making a choice between going into the bar and at first thinking that he could have just a couple of ginger ales and be fine, knowing that he probably would go back to drinking. This was early on, within 6 months of his sobriety. And so what he did was, in short form here, is that he went to a framed sign that had churches, phone numbers for different churches. He dialed that up, got the clergy on the phone, who referred him to a Henrietta Seiberling, who was a member of the Oxford group, who then ultimately referred him to Dr. Bob. So it's kind of an amazing thing that happened there, because first and foremost, had that business transaction gone through and had been successful, Bill W. might never have started AA, and he might even have passed away early from alcoholism. don't know, but that's could be a possibility. It certainly would have prevented him with that success of actually reaching out and finding Dr. Bob at the time. And so kind of that things have to happen for a reason, and it's an amazing kind of step-by-step process and how we got to the beginnings of AA and what Bill ultimately did. Also, had he decided to go into the bar, he might never have pursued the folks with the different churches, and then finding Henrietta Seiberling with the Oxford group. But he did pick up the phone. He called a particular church that happened to be in touch with Henrietta Seiberling, et cetera, et cetera. You can kind of see the way things worked out, and it's just amazing that it did happen. And this work with others, early on, Bill was recognizing the fact that he wanted and needed to work with others in order to stay sober himself. So what's also important here is that he wasn't successful in first half a dozen people that he tried this with. It wasn't working. And so, it also speaks to his fortitude in order to keep sticking with it and reaching out to others. Now, it did, in fact, ultimately work with Dr. Bob, which we'll find out more later, but nonetheless, that was his first success. And I'll also say, kind of in a precursor to Dr. Bob's story, is that he ended up being profoundly successful in his working with other alcoholics. In fact, I think he is they attribute to him in the success of over 5,000 alcoholics that he reached out to and helped become recovered alcoholics. Rob?
Excellent. Thank you, Leo. This physician has repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but it failed. But when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never before been able to muster. He sobered, never to drink again, up to the moment of his death in 1950. This seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no alcoholic could. It also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery.
Yeah, so this really is reinforcing the fact that one alcoholic can gain the attention and the willingness of another alcoholic. Nothing seems to work as well. If you're a non-alcoholic trying to work with an alcoholic, for whatever reason, it seems to get lost in the translation. But one alcoholic with their experiences can win over another alcoholic fairly quickly. And in fact, that's what we've found to be again and again the case. And that is one alcoholic working with another. And it's not just working with another, it's strenuous work and with one alcoholic to another. And that work, you will find as you do this, working with other alcoholics is going to keep you sober as well, which is one of the most important parts of working with other alcoholics, is that it keeps you sober. You have this sense of obligation and responsibility to these other alcoholics, and therefore that in and of itself takes away that urge to drink. That malady, which we are going to describe, is the defense against that first drink, and that we suffer from, and then ultimately triggering the allergy, which we will, again, like I said, cover in more detail later. But this is an important point. Alcoholics working with other alcoholics is vital to the permanent recovery. Rob?
And why one alcoholic can get through to another alcoholic? Because the alcoholic understands what the other one's going through. He understands that strange mental twist. We'll find out more about that as we go through the book. But Bill is telling us how to stay sober. It also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. Step 12 is mentioned again, constantly all through this book, step 12. Leo, it is 12:55. Do you want to bring Mr. Bill into it?
Yes, I do. So one of the things we do is we ask Bill from New Jersey to join in and give his insight. Bill?
Hi, this is Bill, alcoholic from New Jersey. Thanks a lot, guys. It's a good job. There's a lot of information in here, and you guys went through it pretty good. Basically, what this part that we went through, what it's doing, it's giving us a little bit of how the book was put together and what some of the changes were in it, and some of the stuff that we're supposed to do. And like was mentioned, this book talks right in the beginning, right in the forward to the first edition, about working with other alcoholics. We're not even up to the steps yet, and this book is already talking about working with other alcoholics. That is the solution for alcoholism. If you don't get the solution for alcoholism, you're going to suffer from untreated alcoholism, and that's not good, because you're going to wind up on a dry drunk or a wet drunk. And here in the forward to the second edition, he gives us a little bit of history of what went on here in the beginning. He talks about when he was in Akron, Ohio, he suddenly realized that in order to save himself, he must carry his message to another alcoholic. Bill remembered when he was back in New York and he tried to go to the town's hospital and carry the message to people there, or the Calvary Mission, and try to help people that couldn't stop drinking. He felt better and he didn't want to drink. It took away his desire to drink or his urges to drink. So when he was in Akron and he was thinking about walking into the bar and maybe I could have 3 drinks because I got 6 months of sobriety, he realized that what he did in New York kept him sober, so he needed to find another alcoholic. And he made some phone calls, and whatever happened, he wound up with getting in touch with Dr. Bob, and that's what kept Bill sober. And it says here, it also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. In other words, if I want to stay recovered permanently, I have to do strenuous work with another alcoholic. That means I have to carry the message to someone else. And the reason I carry the message to another alcoholic is not so they can get sober, it's so I can stay sober. If they get sober, that's a bonus. That's a wonderful thing if they get sober. But whether they get sober or not, just the fact that I'm carrying the message to them, that's what this program tells me to do for me to stay sober. So if you don't want to relapse, if you don't want to go back out and get drunk again, you have to try to carry the message to other alcoholics. And you can do that in the meeting. You don't have to necessarily go dragging people out of bars or off park benches. One of the best ways that you can do step 12 is just share honestly when you're in a meeting. Somebody on the other side of the room may get it. You're helping people by telling how you stayed sober. That's basically what this whole book is about. It's in order for us to stay sober, we have to try to help somebody else stay sober. This is an unconventional disease with an unconventional solution. It works exactly like the opposite of what we would normally think. I would normally think if I want to stay sober, I got to focus on me and keep me sober. It doesn't work like that. This book tells me I have to focus on somebody else and try to help them stay sober, and that's what's going to keep me sober in the long run. So basically, that's what we went through here today. And thanks again, guys. A very good rendition of all of this. That's all I got. Thanks for letting me share.
Thanks so much, Bill. Appreciate you. Bill has a meeting on Fridays at 11 a.m. Eastern time. I will be putting that information in the chat momentarily. Leo, you're muted.
Sorry about that. We will close with the Serenity Prayer, and then we'll open it up for some questions and discussions.
Perfect. The Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference.